She said it out loud, almost like a joke, almost like a prayer. What if you passed? 6 months before the world fell apart, Samantha Busch looked at her husband and asked him the most chilling question a wife could ever ask. She told him, on her podcast, that if he ever died, she'd need another child just to stay connected to him, just to have a piece of him left. Nobody laughed. Not really. And nobody knew, not Samantha, not Kyle, not the millions of fans watching, that those words would stop being hypothetical on May 21st, 2026. Kyle Busch was 41 years old. He had just won a Truck Series race at Dover. He was finally turning it around after 2 brutal seasons. The comeback was happening. Rowdy was back. And then, without warning, he was gone, taken by pneumonia that spiraled into sepsis so fast that by the time the world even knew he was sick, the statement was already written. The racing world went silent. The man who had won 234 races across NASCAR's 3 national series. The man who was more wins, more controversy, more heart, more fire than almost anyone who had ever sat in a stock car. Gone in a matter of hours. Not in a crash. Not in the fire and thunder of competition. Just gone. But then something changed. Because in the middle of that grief, in those first devastating days, something surfaced. Something Samantha had said months before any of this. Words from a podcast episode that nobody could have imagined would one day feel like prophecy. Let's go back. November 2025. Samantha Busch is recording an episode of her podcast, Certified Oversharer. She's known for being open, real, unfiltered, the kind of person who says what everyone else is too afraid to say. And on that day, she said something that the internet would eventually revisit with a breaking heart. She told her audience that she had brought up something dark with Kyle. Something morbid. She called it herself. I told him the most morbid story the other day. I was like, what if you passed? I would have to have another kid to be connected to you and name that child after you. Think about that for a second. She wasn't being dramatic. She wasn't predicting anything. She was just being honest the way she always is, speaking the fears that most people bury deep and never say out loud. And Kyle? He listened. They talked about it. They sat with the weight of that conversation together. That's who they were. That was their love. And now, just 6 months later, Samantha is living the exact moment she described. Not hypothetically. Not on a podcast. In real life. In the real world. With 2 kids, Brexton, 11 years old. Lennox, just 4. Here's what people don't fully understand about Kyle and Samantha's story. It wasn't just a racing love story. It was a survival story. They met in 2007 at an Indianapolis race event. There was something magnetic about them from the start. By New Year's Eve 2010, they were married in Chicago. And from the outside, everything looked like a fairy tale. Championships, success, fame, the whole thing. But nobody saw what was happening behind closed doors. For years, Kyle and Samantha struggled to have children. The pain of that journey, the IVF treatments, the heartbreak, the medical bills that could run up to $75,000, it's the kind of thing that either tears a couple apart or bonds them in ways nothing else can. It bonded them. And out of their own suffering, they built something extraordinary, the Samantha and Kyle Busch Bundle of Joy Fund, a foundation that helped other families afford IVF when they couldn't do it alone. Over $2 million in grants. More than 110 babies born because of what they started. They took their pain and made it someone else's miracle. That's who Kyle Busch really was. Off the track, away from controversy, beyond the rowdy persona, he was a husband who held his wife's hand through heartbreak and then turned that heartbreak into hope for strangers. But nobody expected what came next. On May 21st, the NASCAR world didn't just lose a driver. They lost a father figure to an entire generation of racing. They lost the kind of competitor who made every Sunday feel like something was at stake. 63 Cup wins, 2 championships, a record 234 victories across all 3 national series. Numbers that don't feel real when you say them out loud. And 3 days after he died, Samantha appeared at Charlotte Motor Speedway, the Coca-Cola 600, the first race after his passing. She walked out onto that track wearing a black T-shirt that read Battle of the Busch, the same shirt Brexton wore standing right beside her. Kyle's parents were there. Kurt Busch, his older brother, stood nearby looking like a man carrying more grief than a person should have to carry. And Samantha broke down, right there, in front of the cameras, in front of the crowd, in front of an entire sport that was trying to hold itself together. She didn't try to hide it. She didn't hold it in. She just wept, because what else do you do when the person you built your entire life around is suddenly just not there anymore? NASCAR CEO Steve O'Donnell stood at a microphone and said this was Kyle Busch's home. Every racetrack was Kyle Busch's home. And the crowd, thousands of people, stood in silence. That's when everything fell apart. Not in a dramatic way, not in a single moment, but in the quiet, relentless way that grief works. When you realize the phone isn't going to ring with his voice on the other end. When your 11-year-old son asks you something you don't know how to answer. When the car with his number on it sits covered in the garage because nobody knows what to do with it yet. Richard Childress Racing announced they were retiring the number 8 car, reserving it for Brexton, Kyle's son, for when he's ready to race. For when the time comes, think about that image. A car parked and waiting, a number held in trust, a legacy handed to a child who is still only 11 years old and who just lost his father. There's a version of this story where Kyle Busch is just a NASCAR legend, where we talk about the records and the trophies and the championships and the rivalries. And he was all of that, every bit of it. But that's not the full story. The full story is a woman on a podcast in November who said, "What if you passed?" and meant it as a fear, as something she never really thought would happen. The full story is 2 people who fought for their family before they even had one. The full story is a foundation, and a son named Brexton, and a little girl named Lennox who is 4 years old and too young to understand why her daddy isn't coming home. And now Samantha is carrying all of it. She's carrying the grief and the foundation and the children and the legacy of a man who was, as NASCAR put it, a rare talent, one who comes along once in a generation. She said she'd need to have another child just to feel connected to him. And somehow, that line doesn't feel morbid anymore. It feels like love, like the most human kind of love, the kind that looks directly at loss and refuses to let it be the end of the story. Kyle Busch was 41 years old. He had just started to turn it around. He had more races to run. And yet, some stories don't get the ending they deserve. Some people leave before we're ready to say goodbye, and the ones left behind have to find a way, somehow, some way, to keep living in the silence where that person used to be. Samantha Busch is doing that right now, with 2 children, with a foundation, with the memories of a man who made her laugh, made her cry, made her the woman she is. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of what really matters behind the trophies and the headlines, drop a comment below. Tell us what Kyle Busch meant to you. And if you're new here, subscribe, because we're going to keep telling the stories that deserve to be told. Rest easy, Rowdy.